Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV. We are back again on another outstanding topic: communist infiltration of the Catholic Church. Um, yeah, we are welcome again with Brother Alexis Bonolo, and I see we weren't the only ones to cover this topic early this morning.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on. It's always great to be on Order Militaris Radio TV, breaking new horizons in independent Catholic media in the English-speaking world. But you chose this topic, I think, almost a week ago, so we have told everyone we're going to talk about it. Someone is evidently listening to Order Militaris Radio and getting ideas. So it's good because it's a topic that needs to be talked about.
So, what is communism for all those people listening?
Okay, so you have to distinguish communism from Marxism. So communism's, the name comes from a section of Paris called the commune. And the Latin word commune just means community. That's where we get our word community, but it's a section of Paris. And it was important in the French Revolution for organizing masses of individuals who could be weaponized for the revolution. But it really got its fame in the riots, the commune riots of Paris in 1848, where very similar to what's going on in the United States right now, a section of the city just fell completely out of the control of the government, and there was all kinds of rioting, mayhem, and looting and fires for months on end. And they barricaded themselves in, and that was the commune. And they called themselves the communists, and they demanded an end to social order and stuff like that. The revolutions of 1848, which broke out throughout most European countries, were orchestrated by Freemasonry and the international Jewish bankers who wanted to destabilize a Christian monarchy. So the name there, from then on, the name communists referred to that kind of anti-monarchical, anti-Christian, anti-property class, anti-capitalistic kind of rebellion. But Marx, Karl Marx, writes his book Das Kapital. He's of Jewish descent. He's funded by Engels, who is said also to have been Jewish. And in his book, he takes the Hegelian dialectic. Hegel was a German philosopher, a materialist, who believed that all history is because one power arises and it causes an opposite power to arise, and then by the conflict of the two, a third power arises. It was just a silly theory to, create some theory of history without God. So because for Hegel, history is God, and it explains itself. But that was called Hegelian dialectics. So Marx took it and he brought it down to the level of materialism, and he felt, well, one class causes another class to exist, and by both classes fighting, a third class comes. So in his Das Kapital, he basically says man will arrive at the perfect society once the capitalist order is destroyed by the proletariat, and we have a dictatorship of the proletariat, a completely classless society where there's no family, no nothing, no anything. Everyone is equal and can do what they please, and everyone owns everything in common. And it was kind of like a return to what Plato was advocating in the Republic. Most people have heard about Plato and of his work on political theory called the Republic, but most don't know that in Plato's Republic, the final state is a communist system ruled by a philosopher who is a homosexual and is married to another man. Okay, that isn't Plato's Republic, and Plato was a pagan. He was also homosexual, as far as historians believe. So communism is attempting the same thing. So they want to completely destroy Western civilization, replace it with a completely pagan thing, because the people behind communism are not Jews who believe in the Old Testament. They're complete atheists, whether they're Jews or not Jews. And for them, there is no world to come. There is no life to come. Perfection must be acquired now. So they're obsessed with revolution now, gaining power now, gaining control now. And They're very angry, deeply disturbed people. Most of them had problems in childhood. They hated their parents or they hated their father. And so all this just spills out in their politics of hate. So communism is a political theory which, if you adopt, will lead you to want to destroy your race, your culture, your religion, and your nation, and your form of government and your form of society, because it proposes a solution that cannot be attained without destroying all these things. So it appeals to, when it was originally proposed as a theory, it appealed to only the most um, despicable and immoral characters, and no one thought anything of it. But as morality has decreased and the quantity of those people have increased, and the breakdowns of family and the industrial revolution and stuff, you have a lot more individuals who were, when a person leaves Christianity or Judaism, any religion that thinks that salvation's in the world to come, then they tend to think they want salvation in this world because they've rejected the world to come. And so they want paradise on earth. And so they're very susceptible of falling into communism, especially since communism is anti-religion. And most people see it as a political justification of their own rejection of morality. So that's what communism and Marxism is. So Marxism, though, takes over ideologically the communist movement. And they start propagating all over Europe these things called the international socialists, and they have correspondence committees all over Europe. So when you ever hear the phrase correspondence, that was a communist institution, so that one group in one country could communicate with the other, and they could promote their own things. And since a lot of it was involved in writing, stamping, and printing, a lot of Jews were involved. As a matter of fact, I think it was the founder of one of the major news services. Oh, what is it called? Started by spending his money printing communist tracts in Germany in the 1840s. Then he went to England and founded one of the main news services. I think it's not API, UPI, I forget what it's called. But so that's the communists in journalism have been heavily infiltrating journalism from the 1850s onward. So you run into those theories among them.
Next questions are going to be dealing with the testimony of Dr. Bella Dodd. But first, who is she?
Okay. So, oh yeah, that news agency was Reuters. So, most people who have heard of Bella Dodd know she was an American. She had been an ambassador. I'll tell you the whole story about it. So she was born in 1904 on a ranch in the town of Picerno in southern Italy, in the province of Potenza, which is the middle of the lower foot. And her real name is Maria Assunta Isabella Visono. And Isabella in Italian short is Bella. And she married a man by the name of Dodd. So she was born an Italian and Roman Catholic. After birth, when she was 6 years old, her father emigrated to New York. And as she grew up, she lost her Catholic faith and became a staunch communist. So she was very intelligent, very animated person. You might say that she was one of these liberated women of the flapper age. She got a degree in law because, unlike what most people think, Southern Italians really all wanted their children to get a degree in school and get a better life than they had. She becomes a professor in political sciences, and she was such a dynamic and charismatic figure that she was named head of the teachers union in New York State. So, which is quite a significant achievement for an Italian American in that era. However, the teachers' unions have always been heavily infiltrated by the communists. In fact, they were targeted by the Marxists, but we might talk about that later. And so she ends up joining the Communist Party of the United States, and she becomes a member of the National Council for the Communist Party of the United States until 1949. um, being in the United States, she didn't suffer the horrors of the Second World War because the United States mainland was not afflicted by that, except for a few occasional things, balloons that came over from Japan and things of that sort. And that's who she was, and that's her key. That's what sets her up to know what she is about. We're about to talk about what she reveals.
Yeah. The first thing she mentions in her testimony in the video I have here that we can't play because, well, this audio don't pick up from YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
How did the communists infiltrate the schools?
Yeah, so the most people know that the communism as an ideology is big on promoting itself because it's about world takeover, world domination, obtaining a paradise on earth, and therefore the destruction of everything that opposes it. And Russia, once it fell to the communists, became a big promoter of communism worldwide. And there was already these international socialists around the world. So they saw the revolution in Russia as a big, boost for their cause. And they start actively collaborating with Russia to promote the revolution around the world. So the Marxists are very devious people, and they know that to get people to become Marxists, you have to control their thoughts. Kind of like any cult or sect. We've talked about groupthink, and the Marxists are big on groupthink. So they're constantly writing and speaking, and uh, they're constantly promoting their errors in society and constantly trying to get into positions of power and authority because they know if they start dribbling in a little of the little error will lead to acceptance of more error. So they targeted educational institutions, religious institutions, political parties. They targeted any part of the society that would have influence and on the masses, because they believed falsely that the revolution that was obtained in Russia could be um, redone in other countries. Although, as we will see in history, they never succeeded in a Marxist revolution in any educated Western country. They only succeeded in poor rural countries where their lives were just easily accepted by people who were illiterate and had no way of knowing, what they were talking about and what they were promising them. So the education journalism were targeted in the 30s, and we see it here. She was head of the teachers union in New York State, and then she becomes a communist. So she was probably targeted for recruitment, someone susceptible to that. And they go after particularly individuals who don't have much religiosity or who are atheists and not practicing their faith. So how they actually did it, they went after schools. Even with journalism, they tried to infiltrate the universities that actually were giving the degrees in education. They got their individuals to write textbooks, and then they used their political influence to get their textbooks accepted in schools and universities, and therefore their agents in the universities could use textbooks who from produced by their agents in the publishing industry. But none of this would have happened without financial backing. And we have to admit and recognize from the beginning that communism only got as far as it has in the world because it was heavily financed. And if you look at the financing, it all traces back to New York Street and to investment houses that are controlled by Freemasons and Jews. All traces back to that, or big banking families in Europe who are Jewish. Because they were the money behind this, and they've thrown lots of money at it. But since they controlled banks and were inventing money out of thin air or had access to print money because they controlled national treasuries, they were throwing away money that wasn't their own. It was actually taxpayers' money. So it was very devious and very insidious and unrelenting. The communists just never surrender. They just keep going on because for them, they have to have paradise in this world. And it's a form of groupthink, extreme groupthink that turns people into sociopaths willing to commit any crime for the advancing of the revolution. and they just can't contain themselves. I remember during the lockdown here in Italy when they were talking about all the controls necessary to protect you from getting infected. One of the ministers of the ruling government, which is left wing but not strictly Marxist, actually came out and said, well, if these controls don't work, what we need then is an absolute dictatorship of the proletariat and seize all private property. That was the guy who was saying. It was like, I felt like I was watching the movie Dr. Strangelove, which was a satire on the Cold War, where Peter Sellers is playing the former Nazi doctor, and his arm keeps going up and he keeps saying Heil Hitler, because this guy just couldn't restrain himself to start talking about the revolution of the proletariat. And no one knew this guy was an extreme Marxist, but he revealed it in that interview. So they know they can't come out openly and say it, but they're just, once they accept it, they're just totally insane. I remember talking to two Marxists in Sicily many years ago about employment and pricing and jobs. And you would just go in circles with them. They didn't think anymore. They were like talking to someone in a cult. You made a statement to create an argument, and they just totally ignore what you say, and they go back to their argument like a broken record. And they're human beings, but they're just, their minds were completely gone, completely gone.
The next thing she brought up is, what is the world conspiracy or communist conspiracy? She didn't name the group, folks, but I have to ask, is this the Bilderberger group?
Yeah, the funny thing is that the sad truth that the 19th century, see, what we're taught in schools that the 19th century was a big clash between democracy and tyranny. And there was two types of tyranny, Nazism and communism. But the truth is that Nazis and communism were just completely financed and created by the left, who are all financed from the United States and from big banking families in Western Europe. So we've been subjected for more than 100 years now with a complete narrative control, where everything going on in politics is a theater created and controlled all by the same hand. And that when you think you're voting for a party that's going to oppose the bad guys, you really ended up voting for a party that was controlled by the bad guys. So that however you voted, they got the power. And that is the brilliance of their strategy. And that's very Masonic. Masons are on both sides. So whoever wins, they remain in power. And so until the people turn against the globalists, the Bilderbergers, the Freemasons, and this evil cabal of financiers that are actually trying to enslave humanity, they never will be free. Every candidate they vote for will be their enemy and will lead them to greater slavery, because it's all being controlled by the same group. That is the dark, obscure secret of the 20th century, which few people have talked about. Bella Dodd, in her books revealed the school of darkness. She revealed that really what's behind the communists are the capitalists, but not just any capitalists, a certain group that wants to tear down Western civilization. And they're the ones that finance Nazi Germany. They're the ones that finance Soviet Russia. They're the ones who want free trade. Wanted free trade with China. And they're the ones that have no problem about China taking over institutions in the United Nations.
Speak, how can this group use social and psychological control to control the whole world?
Yeah, so, you know, the average person, if they were thinking about world control, would think about conquering parts of the world, but these people think hierarchically. So they look at the fewest people necessary that you'd have to control the whole world. And they target them, their families, and the institutions that form them, so that they can indirectly or directly ideologically control them by getting them to accept ideas that will cause them to act in such a way that they will do the will of the group that wants to control the world. And this is what I would call the religion of the Antichrist. Because in Christianity, you preach the truth, people accept it willingly without force, they live a beautiful life of virtue, and that inspires future generations to believe and pass on the faith. But in the religion of the Antichrist, it's organized at a table of people who are completely given up to the worship of Satan, money, sex, and power. And their goal is to spread lies, falsehoods, misinformation, and disinformation to manipulate other people and control them, okay? Solely so they can have more power, sex, lies, and worship Satan. That's the whole purpose of it. So it is the religion of the Antichrist. And how do they do it? They go after, for example, schools of journalism. So then every student with a degree in journalism gets hired as a journalist. Therefore, they can, by controlling just the schools of journalism, they can control all mass media in the world, okay? Because all they have to do is set up the criteria that you have to have a degree in journalism, and then they control the schools in journalism. And in the schools of journalism, they control the chief professors. I knew a devout Catholic at my university. I went to the University of Florida, and she had studied for a degree in journalism. She spent 5 years and they were going to flunk her out. Why? Because in one course with one of her professors, who's one of the Marxist control figures in the faculty, she did a report on abortion where she called it abortion, and she called the pro-life movement pro-life, and he gave her an F on her report, saying, no, you must say pro-choice and anti-abortion. And she said, well, you're putting a political color on the report. Each group calls itself what it is. So let's see, at least call one side pro-choice and the other side pro-life. No, the professor wouldn't permit that. So that's when she realized the entire school of journalism was controlled by Marxists. She went on and became a Carmelite nun, which is probably the best thing of all. So that's how they do it, through journalism. Through schools, they go after schools of education, and they'll have their key figures. There's been a lot of reports in the last 10 years or 20 years, 10, 20, 30 years about how higher education in the United States has fallen completely into the hands of communists. And that's because once they get on a tenured position, they make sure to viciously attack, calumniate, insinuate, or somehow prevent other professors becoming tenured who are not Marxists. And so once they're all tenured, they can't be given rid of them. The whole institution becomes Marxist, and they are really just servants of the globalists. So institutions like the London School of Economics, Harvard University, University of Chicago, they are completely controlled by the globalists through these professors and textbooks of lies and control systems. And if you send your children to any school like that, they'll come out a servant of the New World Order. And because unless they have really strong minds, and unless they study in faculties that are not ideologically permeated, they just become completely reprogrammed in those institutions. And that is not accidental. That is intentional. That is the purpose of Marxist infiltration in schools of education, to control whole of society. And in the Catholic Church, they targeted the seminaries. They targeted the universities. Pius X came out against modernists and all these people promoting error. And what he did is he kicked them out of the seminaries. So they went into the secular universities, built up faculties of theology. And then Pius XI let those people back into the seminary, from the seminaries, to come over and teach in the seminaries. And so they got control of the seminaries after the war. And so after the war, pretty much has been very little Catholic education in any Catholic seminaries or pontifical universities. Paul VI completely wiped out the higher Catholic, the whole top level of Catholic administration in the pontifical universities, because they weren't behind his revolution. And ever since that, even here at the Rome, the universities have just gone downhill. Now they're just complete heretical institutions. They attack any Catholic. I know it at the, I've heard reports that at the University of St. Thomas, the Angelicum, that any student that admits that all of the letters of St. Paul were written by St. Paul will be bounced out, because you cannot admit that the letters of St. Paul, which condemn sodomy, are written by St. Paul. If you do, you will be flunked right out of the school. And whether you have the best grades or not, and whether you're ready to receive a doctor or not, you'll be flunked right out. So that's the same kind of ideological control, though in the church, it wasn't evident until recent years that these people were all Marxists. Okay.
How did the communists create liberation theology?
So liberation theology is one of the is a product of Marxist thought comes out of Germany and the Low Countries in like the 50s, and it's a very clever trick. You try to get people to think that the purpose of Christianity is to fulfill what Karl Marx wrote of in his Das Kapital, the revolution of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Well, obviously, you know anything about Christianity. You know Christianity has nothing to do with Karl Marx. It has nothing to do with tearing down order. It has everything to do with everything contrary to that. So they played on ignorance, and they published books full of lies and distortions. One of the leading proponents of this was in South America, and he tried to pass off Marxism as being devotion to St. Francis, for example. And their big thing was to take the parables Christ said about being poor and humble and how he came to save the poor and the humble. And they try to get you to believe that has to do with Christ running a Marxist revolution and helping the proletariat gain power, and they reinterpret Our Lady's thing about he has cast down the proud from their thrones and raised up the poor. They try to make you think that has to do with communist revolution. So it's a rereading of everything in Christianity in the light of Das Kapital to spread the doctrines of Karl Marx. Very devious, extremely dishonest, totally revisionary, and it's completely heretical. Okay, so it's impossible to be a Marxist and a communist and a Christian. Communism, if you accept the concept of Marxism, you are not a Christian, you're a complete pagan, and it's impossible to be in the state of grace or to hold any office in the church. And these people who are Marxists and claim to be your bishop, they're not your bishop, they're not even a Catholic, they're not a member of the church, because their religion is totally different. It's atheistic, it's about revolution in this world. It doesn't believe in salvation, it doesn't give a damn about that, it doesn't even believe the truth in Christianity, and it certainly doesn't accept the authority of Christ and the apostles to teach. So it accepts the authority of Karl Marx to teach. You know, so that's not Christianity, that's apostasy.
When and how did it get a foothold in South America?
So a lot of these theologians who studied from South America studied in German schools. The German schools are already heavily controlled by the Rampolla faction in the church. Nearly all the bishops in South America have been Rampolla men for the last century or so. And heavily influenced not only by the Nazis, but by these schools in Europe like Louvain or Tübingen. And so that's how they infiltrated down through. They had a willing hierarchy, willing to send their best or most evil men to these schools. And then you have people like Leonard Boff, who ex-Franciscan, who was just a devious piece of work. The guy was probably never had a vocation. But what he did is he wrote a book on St. Francis, and he tries to make you think St. Francis was the first Marxist, and therefore all Franciscans should be Marxist. It was the most dishonest piece of junk ever written, and he'll certainly burn in hell for it. But after, because he's never repented of it either. So he leaves the Franciscan order, and he ends up marrying, I think, 3 different women, one after the other, you know, because he's a completely dishonest person. He doesn't keep his word, didn't keep his word to his vows. And John Paul II prevented him from talking at certain conferences, and so he left the Franciscan order. But this is why Bergoglio, when he claims the papacy, takes the name Francis. He's going to do the same game with the Vatican that Boff did with St. Francis, and attempt to totally reinterpret the Catholic religion as a Marxist doctrine. And he will appoint only Marxists to power, and consequently his bishops are not members of the Catholic Church, not only because he's not the Pope, but because they're not even Catholic or Christians. And you have to wake up to this reality and stop calling these people your bishop. You need to openly call them apostates. Any bishop who is praising Black Lives Matter is an apostate. He is a complete godless man. He has no way he could be a bishop or a Catholic priest or a member of the church, because he is advocating absolute depravity, ideologic and moral depravity. And that is totally against all the duties of the faith. So he won't come out and say, I'm no longer Catholic, but he will come out and say, I support Black Lives Matter. Well, then you're a Marxist, you're not a Catholic. And any decent Catholic should just go to the cathedral and throw him right out of the building. And if they has a pile of manure on the pavement, they should aim for that. because it's complete fraud. This is not Christianity at all, and there's no compatibility between Christianity and these so-called liberation theologians, all these so-called martyrs of liberation theology. It's all a bunch of bunk. And whenever you see these people's causes being promoted, they're being promoted by left-wing people of German surnames in the United States who have never believed anything in the Catholic faith. They joined the church to become priests or religious because they're Marxists and they just wanted to infiltrate. And they're big at infiltrating because they're just two-faced liars. Like all false cults, they have to use deceit, because if they actually told you what they're up to, you would just, oppose them right from the start. So
One of the big ones that was it beatified or canonized by John Paul II was Oscar Romero.
Oscar Romero, I don't think he was canonized by John Paul II. I think it was Bergoglio who did that. Okay. But Oscar Romero is a controversial figure. First of all, the communists try to make it appear he's a communist. There's civil war in Salvador. El Salvador was between landowners and the people. And on the one side, you did have the communists, and the others, you had maybe a group that you might say were fascists or extreme right wing. And, he was against excesses and he was assassinated. He's not a martyr for anything. I mean, lots of bishops were killed by landowners because they felt people should get better wages. That doesn't mean they're Marxists. So he's been totally exploited. And there's significant evidence to show he didn't live a saintly life. So I didn't repent of it. So, but there's been more that Bergoglio's tried to canonize. Well, Bergoglio can't canonize anyone any more than you and I could canonize anyone. So what does it matter who he calls the saints? But he's showing his hand. He's putting his cards on the table and showing he's an absolute and complete Marxist. He has there's no Christianity at all except in the appearance of it. And he even admits that the leading member of the Socialist Party in Argentina came to his house weekly as a child. So his family was like that with the Marxists right from the beginning, and he has always been. And so has the Jesuit order been very close with the Marxists since the 50s. So it's just complete fakery. If you go along with it, then you're the fool, because you're saying, it's like a person going to the store and you buy coffee and you open it up and there's not coffee inside, it's dung. And yet it says, well, since it says coffee on the label, I'm going to think it's coffee and I'm going to drink it. Well, that's the same kind of a Catholic who has a bishop, is a Marxist, and says, well, they call him a bishop, so he must be a bishop.
Yeah.
Same kind of stupidity.
Yeah. Now Bergoglio's mentor in Argentina, Jesuit father Juan Carlos Scanonen.
Yeah, so this guy is a real rogue, because like in pure communist style, if you can't get people to accept good communism, get them to accept watered down communism. So he came up with this theology of the poor. And it was a way of promoting liberation theology and yet openly saying, I'm not in favor of liberation theology. So there is no such thing as a theology of poor in the Catholic Church, never has been. There is a theology of poverty, but not of the poor. And not poverty as a material fact, but as a spirit, so the spirit of poverty. So if you're in favor of the spirit of poverty, then you take the vows of poverty and you live poorly. You don't try to steal the property of people's commons, shut down religious orders to take all the property, and take all the money from the banks of the Diocese of Buenos Aires and put it in the Vatican Bank so you can get elected as the next pope. That's Bergoglio. He's an absolute complete hypocrite, and he might use the words of the theology of the poor, but he's all about the avarice of the rich. So it's complete fakery. It's just like Marxism, the complete fakery. Marxists actually don't want a dictatorship of the proletariat. That is, they don't want people like you ruling over the world. They want themselves to rule over the world. And that's why once they get in power, there's no democracy. Their enemies get eliminated. And if you start saying, well, we're supposed to have free discussion here, there's no more free discussion once they get in power, because it was all a trick. It was all a trick.
So they don't want another Catholic monarch on their hands? Come on, guys.
Yeah, when you see the levels of falsehood among the Nazi parties, the Marxist parties throughout the world, all the communist organizations, and all the Masonic organizations, and you run in a Catholic who's opposed to Catholic monarchy, you can say, well, what other form of government is there that could be Catholic? It there's possibility you could have a constitutional Catholic kind of state, but it would have to be pretty darn principled.
Mm-hmm.
But all these others will end up to destroy you. They'll target to eliminate you and genocide you off the face of the map. So if you think monarchy is still bad, there's something you either don't know history or you've been programmed already. And all these ideologies will attempt to program you ideologically with groupthink to trigger you against the Catholic faith, against to a sane political order or a sane notion of morality. And it's all designed to beat you down, to make you submit, and to break your resistance. That's what it's all about. So before opening your mouth and acting like an idiot, learn something about history and what's going on in the church and the world, and realize that these things are to control you. They're not to make you free.
Now we come up to a little bitty town in Switzerland. How devious is this little bitty town with communists and infiltration of the church?
Yeah, some investigators have traced back McCarrick's history to St. Gallen in Switzerland. Even as a seminarian, he was invited there for a summer, and then after that, he just goes on a stellar degree. It gives the impression that he joined some kind of political group, whether it was communists or pedophiles or both, and that St. Gallen is the center of a lot of nefarious activity. And it's no coincidence then that the St. Gallen Mafia, the one who puts Bergoglio in power, is met for 15 years in that town and has something to do with this group that promoted McCarrick, because as soon as Benedict moved against McCarrick, they went after him with a vengeance. He was a member of some kind of secret club, and I think it did turn out that McCarrick was a member of the St. Gallen Mafia, but they don't call themselves mafia as a joke, okay? Psychopathic people, when they call themselves mafia, mean we're going to, by every hook and crook and devious little trick and crime, keep ourselves in power and grab it for control for ourselves.
That's we know how the St. Gallen Mafia was created.
Yeah, so one of the big promoters of modernism after the council was Cardinal Casper. And for several concurrent positions, he was president of the Bishops' Conference of Europe. Because it's unfortunately the case, we live in an age where the scum are highly ambitious, and he wanted to spread his areas of Europe by being president of the Bishops' Council, because that way he could recommend who gets nominated as bishop. So I think that's probably how the founder of the St. Gallen Mafia, Cardinal Daniels, gets promoted cardinal, is probably through the agency of Casper. But once John Paul II gets wind of what they're really up to, he changes the rules for the Bishops' Conference so that Casper can't hold the office anymore. And Casper sees that his political career in the church is over. So he goes to St. Gallen in 91, 92, and with other bishops forms the St. Gallen group. And they will be a group that specifically plots to overthrow the Catholic Church from within. And they work to get all their members promoted to the level of cardinal, and they work to take over the Vatican apparatus through the appointments, and they work to dig up dirt on their enemies. And Cardinal Martini was a chief member. Ivo Furrer, the Bishop of St. Gallen, was a founding member. Shortly, or sometime around the year 2000, Bergoglio is recruited. And that's probably mostly because he took $70 million from the banks of Buenos Aires and put it in the Vatican Bank, so he could give them a slush fund. And he might have used a lot of that money to bribe people from the Vatican Bank too, because once it's in the Vatican Bank, where the money is being spent, no one knows. So he bought himself a power network, and he might have bought that group for himself, because Martini dies, and he's basically left as the leader of it. I remember when Martini died, there was just so everyone, like all the bishops in Italy, went to his funeral, every single one, which was like bizarre. That's kind of like when Ted Kennedy died in the United States, he got a funeral more stately than that of a president. So that shows you where the real power power networks are. Um, they recruited all the other bishops are heavily involved in pedophilia, modernism, atheism, and a desire just to bring down the whole Catholic Church from within. And careerists, godless people that never had a vocation, not faithful to their vows and anything or their promises to God. But they held secret meetings there. It's not like anyone knew these things were going on. We only know about it now because Cardinal Daniels, in his biography, admitted it, and because Bishop Ivo Ferrer, in a short book published in German last summer, spilled the beans on it, on how they organized and why they formed, and how they were opposed to Pope John Paul II and Cardinal Ratzinger.
There's something weird about that abbey where they met, isn't there?
Considering all this evil's going on, there might even be a satanic group somewhere in that town, or maybe even in that abbey. I can't really say. But, you know, when all roads cross in the same piazza, there's something going on there. You can read at fromrome.info an article I published today called The St. Gallen Connection to Those Snarky Vatican ATM Machines. Which explains a lot more interesting things that are really outside the scope of our show today.
I guess you'd call these, so, air quote, bishops, communist or Marxist agents. So are their ordinations valid?
Yes, okay. To get back to Bella Dodd, once she met Archbishop Fulton Sheen and he converted her back to the faith, she writes this book, School of Darkness, and she spills the beans on how the Communist Party in the United States alone infiltrated more than 1,100 men into the church so that they could become bishops and take over the church from within. And if you look at all these really bad actors in the church today, they all became, they all entered the church as began their careers in this age in which the communists were doing these things. And so we can't ignore that reality. But the validity of the ordination of a priest or a bishop has only to do with two things. Is he a man, and is the one ordaining a validly ordained bishop? Okay. It's not even necessary to be baptized for a valid priestly ordination, okay, because it's a sacrament and it's valid in itself. However, to be a member of the church requires the Catholic faith, and if you're not Catholic and you're a Marxist, you're not a member, even if you were ordained a priest or a bishop. However, it may not be public, okay? So this is one of the chief things that they worked on right from the beginning. They worked to get John the 23rd into power, and he made quite sure he wasn't going to condemn communism. Because if any pope came out and established a canon saying, if as a member of a communist party you were automatically excommunicated, then these people, there would be grounds to start legal cases against these people and remove them from power. But since that was never set, and there's only said secret societies, well, they'll claim that communism is not a secret society, it's a public society. However, theologically speaking, if you believe in the communist system, the revolution, the proletariat, you've rejected Catholic morals, which is an essential part of Christian teaching, and therefore you're not a Christian, you're a heretic. Because it is heresy to hold that anyone has authority regarding morals other than God, okay? And that anyone could rightfully propose a system that disagrees with God. That's heresy, and you're not Catholic or Christian or member of the church if you hold those ideas. But since now they've infiltrated all the seminaries and they've controlled most of all the bishops of the world, you'd be hard pressed to find someone that would move a case against them, okay? And even when it came to liberation theology, John Paul II was strongly advised to condemn it, but a lot of forces combined together to keep him from doing that. And while people thought it was suppressed, it never was suppressed. They just went underground. They came back stronger than before.
Since the fall of Soviet Russia, who are their handlers now?
Yeah, okay, so you would think that when communism in Russia came to an end, there'd be no more communists. Well, there is still a communist party in Russia, okay? And the Russian government might still fund communist organizations. I have no information at present about that. But you have to understand that communism was financed and promoted by the bankers in New York City. So now the handlers of the international socialist movement are the globalists. Okay, the globalism, the Bilderberger Group, the Rockefellers, the Gates, the Rothschilds. All these groups are the ones who have always been in power. There's just communism was like Act One, and that act has kind of failed. So now Act Two is globalism, or the New World Order. And if they don't get that, they'll start another act. So that's why they just absolutely love and adore and gush over Bergoglio, because he's a perfect high priest of globalism, socialism, Marxism, modernism, and sodomy. And they just love him for it because that's his religion. But obviously, anyone who teaches those things is not even a Christian, let alone a Catholic, and therefore can't be the Pope. So people who insist he's a Pope are committing a grave mortal sin of lying. They are lying to the people of God. They are deceiving Christ's people by saying a man like that could be a pope, or you can't judge him, or blah, 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 blah. They are evil people because they are insisting on a political reality, even at the point of rejecting the whole Christian faith. People who do that are not Christian, I'll tell you. There's no way Christian faith could say to you that he must be the Pope. Anyone who says he must be the Pope obviously doesn't know the first thing about Christianity. I don't care if he has a degree in an Anglican seminary and gets a tweet from the Pope, okay, a tweet from the president, okay, so without mentioning names. People like that are absolute incompetent jerks. I'm going to say it. They don't know Christianity. Christianity, you have to believe in Jesus Christ as your one master, your sole master. No one can teach contrary to him, and therefore, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're not part of his church. I don't care who you are, how many baptisms or sacraments or cardinal hats you have. You're not a member of the church. You might claim to be, but you're not. People might claim you are, but you're not. And regardless of the claim, if the man commanding you does not have faith, you're not obliged by that command because he's not a member of Christ's body. Just like your foot only moves when it gets nerve signals from your brain, doesn't move when it gets nerve signals from the brain of the person sitting next to you. So you should not obey a command of anyone who doesn't believe in the Catholic faith. It doesn't matter whether the church has announced it or not or yet. You have the right and the duty as an individual Catholic to not obey that person. You don't have to wait for canonical judgment. Those who say they do are absolute Pharisees. And the Pharisees were condemned by Christ more than even the Sadducees. So, wake up and smell the coffee and start living the Christian faith. Your duty, your loyalty, your obedience is owed only to God. Okay, and no one who is in rebellion to God is your superior in senses of religion. He cannot be your superior, even if he's a head of state. If your head of the state is a heretic, you don't have to obey him in everything as much as if he wasn't a heretic. You don't, because he's your enemy and he's an enemy of Christ. And you should just only, when the most necessary things, obey him. So that's just Christianity. I mean, you just can't pretend it's something other than that. You can't pretend that a Christian is obliged to obey. I mean, let's look at the first centuries. Christians refused to join the Roman army because in the Roman army, you would have to offer sacrifice to the gods or to the emperor. And the Christians, even though they were loyal to the Roman Empire and recognized the emperor as the emperor, they did not join the army. They wouldn't do it. They preferred to be put to death, and tens of thousands were put to death for refusing to join the Roman army. Or in the Roman army, they admitted to being Christians and they were put to death. So that's an example of how Christians should really act, okay? It shouldn't be like, oh, well, I'll just sign the statement and I'll go along with it. And I'll recognize that the Supreme Court says it's okay, and therefore I'll arrest any Catholic who's protesting in front of the abortion clinic, blah, 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 blah. You're not a Christian. You don't know what the first thing about obedience is, and you're serving the devil, okay? And that has to be said. I don't care who you are, an archbishop, cardinal, or a local pastor, or a head of police. You're serving the devil when you do evil, following a command of an evil person who's commanding evil, okay?
That's and I want to thank whoever's listening at Church Militant later on, because I learned something before we got going on the show about 5 in the morning. These papers called the Viona files. It's a,
Yeah, so in our program on patent, we talked about McCarthy and communist infiltration and how when the Cold War ended, all these documents came out proving that McCarthy was right in all his accusations. And the Venona files are those files, and you can now read them online, and at least that's some of them. And they confirm the levels of communist infiltration in the United States. It wasn't small levels, it was great levels. Right now in the United States, the Communist Party is the Democratic Party. They're completely communist, top and bottom. Any sane, even JFK kind of Democrat is no longer tolerated in their party and probably would get sick of the thought of voting for any of their candidates. So that's the level of their infiltration in the United States. And they've controlled all the media through the journalism schools. They control most of the boards of directors of big corporations. And this gets back to people wondering, well, how can an organization that is capitalistic be coming out and saying Black Lives Matter, which is Marxist? But that's because Marxism has always been promoted by Wall Street financiers who also control most major companies through their stock. So, and because their stock is held by big banks and the banks are controlled by the financiers. So that's why you see big companies supporting organizations that you would appear would be opposed to big companies, but they're not, because they're both being orchestrated by the same theater company. The Bilderberg Group, if you want to call them that, the globalists.
what else should we tell them about all this?
We're gravely obliged by our Catholic faith to reject Marxism and communism and to oppose Marxists and communists, to out them, to expose them, to denounce them, to get them kicked out of the church, and to encourage other people not to obey them, and in some cases to pick them up and forcibly and physically throw them out of the church. Not to let them near your children, not to let them near your elderly parents, not to let them run over rule in institutions. Don't let them become principal of your elementary school, because then that will be the end of your Catholic elementary school. That will be the end of your children. They'll be completely ruined. And certainly don't support their institutions, their parties, their associations, their unions. Don't have anything to do with it. Don't let them take over your union. That will be the end of workers' rights. So they'll just use it for their own agenda. Because as I said, these people are complete fakes, complete frauds, complete heretics, completely godless, immoral people. They're sociopathic. In many cases, they're psychopaths. And you don't want anything to do with these people. I mean, they are the plague. And if you want to put a finger on it, they are the members of the Church of the Antichrist, and their politics is the religion of the Antichrist. And I'm not just saying communists, that's Freemasons and Nazis. It's all the same thing. It's all being orchestrated by the same group. A Catholic is obliged to reject them and make a solemn promise to God to oppose them. And that's why it's very important for Catholics to be devoted to Our Lady of Fatima, who promised victory over the communists, and to say her rosary every day and wear her scapular and stay very close to the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, in whom comes the power and the victory over all these evil people.
Yeah. You've probably been seeing me drink from my new cup. It has kept my iced tea pretty darn cold, folks. You can get one of these mugs at our Teespring store for $14.99. It's you can click on Order Militaris Radio Store on the menu bar up here, and can use a debit card, credit card, I believe PayPal, maybe a few other different payment methods. Um, it's a pretty impressive cup. And yes, it will sweat with high humidity here and wherever you are, but it keeps your drink cold and probably keep your drink hot.
And if you drink from a cup with the Blue Cross, Order Militaris' Blue Cross on it, you let everyone know you're not a Marxist.
Yeah. And if you need a show on your phone that you're not a Marxist. We got cell phone covers for your iPhone or Samsung phone. You want a T-shirt? We got one of those. Need a hoodie? We got one of those. You want a car decal sticker? That'll drive the people nuts.
And do not forget, if you really like Ordo Militaris Radio TV, to make a small free will offering. The bottom of any of the pages for Ordo Militaris Radio, there's a button for making an offering. You can make a one-time or recurring offering as you decide. And that helps us pay the expenses because in this apostolate, Ordo Militaris Inc. has made a grant of over $1,000, I think, so far to get the radio station up and going. So this is all for you, the listeners. So please support the network and help it grow so it can help others and bring the truth out. And because in the English-speaking world, among Catholic media, there's almost none who are uncontrolled, and we're totally uncontrolled. We'll just tell you the sincere facts, and we do it for your own good and for your own liberty in Christ.
Yeah.
So if you find that worthwhile, then please support Ordo Militaris Radio TV.
Yeah. And there's a flag behind you too.
Yeah, so the other way of supporting Ordo Militaris Radio TV is to purchase one of these flags from ordo-militaris.us. We sell these flags to raise money for our humanitarian efforts. But if you're a listener of this radio station and you buy one, let AJ know, and then half the proceeds will go to the expenses of the radio station. And it's the battle flag of Marco Antonio, High Admiral of the Catholic Armada at the Battle of Lepanto, October 7th, 1571. It was raised at noon to signal the opening of the attack. And you can see on it has the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, and it has the shields of the four Catholic powers in the Holy League of 1571, whose navies were present: Venice, the papacy under Pius V, the Kingdom of Spain, and then Don Juan of Austria. And it's a great flag to fly on your property to let everyone know you're really Catholic and that you're a militant Catholic. And so you could also fly it from your balcony, or you're carried in procession for Our Lady of the Rosary or any other Catholic feast, or fly it from your boat. If you have one of those big halyards and big flagpoles right near a lake or the ocean, it's wonderful you fly it on there too. And it's a kind of flag that will cause conversations because no one's ever seen it. So I encourage you to get one if you like.
Yeah. We ain't done yet, folks, exposing the evil. Tomorrow's show. Who is Margaret Sanger and her connection to the Nazi Party? And,
yeah, it's going to be a great show.
And we don't just touch on her; we touch on Bill Gates too. So.
Yeah, we'll trace the Nazi Party all the way to Bill Gates and show how they're highly connected.
So please tune in tomorrow. I think what time?
Probably the regular time.
Okay. Be about 7:40 a.m. U.S. Central Time. 2:40 Rome time. Yep. So tune in then for who is Margaret Sanger and her connection to the Nazi Party and connection to Bill Gates. You don't want to miss it. This is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.